today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the ball. Me out to the buy me some.
Monday Morning Quarterback on the 6th of August, 2018. Our first program was in our second program. I have to look at it and see. But nonetheless, we're coming to you from WBRN Radio. It's our second program. And on the Boston Red Network, we've started updating the bostonred.org site and putting up some timely articles. You can go over to that bostonred.org and peruse it. Nonetheless, we'll start off with the Paul Manafort case. We don't spend a lot of time on it. He was the manager of the Trump campaign at the very beginning, but he's being tried in Alexandria, Virginia for some accounting machinations, what used to be called evading his income tax obligation. Now, his accountant was there, and the accountant, of course, was given immunity. Immunity is common in these types of cases, and the lawyers are going to cross-examine her about the immunity agreement. Now, this is one thing that you expect. A note about Alexandria, Virginia. It is known as a prosecution of friendly jurisdiction. Some of the 9/11 types were tried there. Misabi, I can't think was his name. Anyway, it's been so long that he was tried there, and several others were also tried in Alexandria, Virginia. And thus they got convictions. Now, in this case, a little bit different kind of case. The lawyers so far, this is a Reuters dispatch, have been very gentle on their cross-examination of witnesses, not to badger them, and also at the same time not to unturn any stones not turned by the prosecution. This is pretty normal when you're cross-examining someone else's witness, I should say. This is one of the things that you want to deal with. Now, as far as the person's immunity agreement, it's probably pretty much a standard immunity agreement there, unless obviously she was dipping into the funds. We'll see when we get the that part of it out there. Let's see, her name is Cynthia Laporta. Anyway, she was on the stand there, and it's it actually saved him $500,000. The unfortunate problem for Mr. Manafort is that any savings he could have obtained has, as they say, disappeared in attorney fees and various other machinations, including the loss of his liberty. Not a very smart idea. But when you start talking about income tax and accounting tricks, it depends on what the accounting trick was. Now, they actually, from what they've said, falsified various parts of the return, receipts, etc. And he was in the lobbying business, basically, and the money was diverted to offshore accounts, and that was part of it there. So it got to be fairly complicated. Now, for an accountant to go along with a client That is something that is usually routinely done unless it's obviously too flamboyant a move to happen there. She was, of course, the 14th witness according to this dispatch. And this particular indictment doesn't address collusion. Now, that'll be addressed in a different indictment. Laporta testified in one instance, Manafort signature was on a loan agreement created in 2015 and inappropriately backdated for the 2014 tax year. This is much more common than you would think, this backdating scheme. Many times people are not caught. She was one of 5 witnesses evidently granted immunity. 4 others included an insurance agent, 2 bankers who worked on a mortgage for Manafort, and Connor O'Brien, a former assistant to Laporta at the accounting firm KWC. Period there. So this is how this trial goes on. That usually fairly dry types of testimony there. While some of the string out of Laporta's testimony could prove useful to the defense, the most important challenge will be undercutting Gates, who, as a part of his plea deal, admitted to helping Manafort evade income tax and misleading banks to get loans. Now, Gates will appear this week. The real fireworks are going to come from Mr. Gates on the stand and on cross. That's from J.D. Evers, a retired attorney from Virginia who attended the trial. Well, there'll be a lot of this as far as commentary by retired attorneys, attorneys that are not a party to this. Now, the various networks have their own legal consultants that will appear, talking heads, or whatever you want to call them, will appear to evaluate the case. And this is just from the Reuters dispatch. Obviously, we were not in the courtroom to hear all the evidence. The Washington Post would have more information on this because it would be a local town newspaper. But at the same time, reporters were there from Reuters and many other newspapers. And this is by Nathan Laney, I suppose how you pronounce it, and Sarah Lynch and Karen Freefeld, I'm sorry, F-E-L-D. Anyway, nonetheless, this is their dispatch from Alexandria. We'll hear more of this after Gates testifies in the conclusion of these witnesses. We thought we'd sort of go into this a little bit, not very much in it. Now let's move on here. This is interesting how the Washington Post has framed this. This is the campaign in Michigan. Abdul El Said is running for governor in Michigan. He has been touring the state of Michigan. He was touring with Bernie Sanders. And one of the items here is Medicare for All. Medicare for All, we had the speech from Netroots by Cynthia Nixon, who is also running on a Medicare for All. Now, Medicare for All would just simply mean that we would move to a Medicare insurance model such as baby boomers like myself have, and that's deducted from your payroll tax. Now, on a state, that would be on a national basis, incidentally. On a state basis, it is always a situation when you go into these kinds of situations that you will have upfront costs. But upfront costs, and over the years, your costs will go down. Now, this is from the Washington Post. Single-payer Democrats on the ballot in red and blue states from California. The Lieutenant Governor there, Newsom, is heavily favored to win, where Democrat Jay Gomez believes the issue will give him an opening against a popular Republican governor. This is in Massachusetts. Now remember, Willard Romney had a health care plan there, and it's still in the Commonwealth. The passage, of course, of the Affordable Care Act fueled a backlash from powerful Republicans. No doubt about that, because they were able to frame it in such a way as to scare people. As the late, great Jerry Pippin used to say many, many times, that as people understood and used the Affordable Care Act, they would like it, and there's no doubt about that. But the Republicans representing old hash industries have railed against it, and this is just purely a financial interest. Democrats running for the House and Senate have talked about Medicare for all in aspirational terms, no doubt about that. Is universal health coverage first brought up by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Gibbon Hill Harry out of Independence, Missouri, Harry S. Truman. There are going to be bills in a dozen states. This is from Sam Munger, a spokesman for the liberal state initiative Exchange, who added there has been a surge in single-payer legislation since 2017. 90% of the bills won't go anywhere. Well, that's probably true, because they're controlled by Republican legislatures or turncoat Democrats. Now in Maryland, our own Ben Jealous, of course, is running. And this is the old thing, tax and spend. Ben Jealous, according to ads, would levy a $2,800 fee for every man, woman, child in the state. The ad tested strong in Republican polling. Well, it probably does. But is that figure correct? No. But what they have not talked about is what it would save the people of Maryland. Embracing an expensive single-payer health care system could be a major drag on their campaigns, as it shows voters they are fully supporting a significant tax hike. Now, see, this is from John Thompson of the Republican Governors Association. Now, this is one of the things that's out here, and its time has come. Inslee is out of Washington State. He says that Republicans are losing the battle on health care. There's no doubt about that. When people are actually faced with increasing health care costs, that is why the Trump administration came up with the so-called skinny plans. Those skinny plans are worth zero. They cost less, yes, but they cover very, very little. They have high copays. In other words, if a person doesn't plan on being sick, those plans will work out for you. But if you are hospitalized or go to the ER or taken to the ER, etc., you will end up paying for most of that yourself, if not all. And depending on medications like insulin, etc., I'm not certain if those plans cover that. They also don't cover pre-existing conditions. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road. But it has to be explained to people that the cost, you pay costs for many, many things in taxation, including $700 plus $800 billion to the military. And this is Cynthia Nixon in the September price in New York has endorsed the New York Health Care Act. The New York Health Care Foundation estimated the state would need to increase revenue to pay for the plan. Now, I'm not sure what the state health care foundation is, 150% basically, but it would save $2 billion in the long run. Now, that's a conservative estimate there, period. In Connecticut, this is the same thing. Neil Lamont said he would champion a single-payer plan, but at a state level. Rhode Island, Matt Brown has promised to create an expert health commission. And Andrew Gillum, he's the mayor of Tallahassee, Florida, an underdog for governor in Florida. Has a single-payer brand also. We know that Medicare expansion and Medicaid for all saved states and this nation $2 trillion if fully implemented. There's no doubt about that, and that is a very conservative course. Now, at the Trump administration, their Medicaid and Medicare Administrator Seymour Vermer, appropriate name, said the administration has granted waives for states like the Commonwealth of Kentucky for right-wing purposes, expanding work requirements for Medicaid, and denied waives if the state wanted to enact a single payer. That is a problem that has to start being dealt with in November this year. Now, to create a statewide system in California has floundered in the past 2 years. Democratic-controlled legislature beset by concerns about the estimated $400 billion cost, twice the size of the state's current budget. It's doubtful if it would cost that much. In the primaries, some Senate-led candidates for governor have similarly pointed out the practical difficulty of implementing a single payer and accused its advocates of prioritizing slogans over results. Gretchen Whitmer, former state legislator in Michigan, said in an interview she soon will release a health care plan that El Said and Shara Fidar, a wealthy businessman, also run on single payer, but it was not realistic. Well, they said that about the Affordable Care Act. They said the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare would destroy healthcare jobs. It has not. Healthcare industry has created more jobs than any other sector. El Said, who left the Detroit Health Department to run for governor, said that Michcare would be implemented over several years. And that's usually the situation with most of these particular situations here. An average family, it's predicted, would save $38 out of their paycheck each month, while saving $359 in health insurance in that time. Democrats would flip or control the legislature in 2008, predicted to flip it in 2018 and strengthen their advantage for 2020. That would be good in Michigan. It would start to set the state right, not right-wing. Lansing would set the stage for Democratic victories in 2020, and that is a sensible situation there. And they talk about the Vermont plan. As Bernie Sanders pointed out, the governor Shimlin there was the problem, not the plan in Vermont. And you're going to find many of these. You have to understand, these plans, you're starting from zero. And it's what happened in the Commonwealth on the plan worked out by the legislature in the Commonwealth and the governor at the time, Willard Romney, to cover all people. Yes, it is expensive up front because you're covering people with not only preventive, but you're also covering people with hypertension, diabetes that has not been treated properly. And you're starting to treat these people, and thus you're saving lives. There's no doubt about that. Looking at my case, not been for Obamacare, we would have been dead because it afforded us to get the type of treatment we needed for prostate cancer and the detection of it. And that is one of the PSA test is one of the more inexpensive tests. Our community clinic, for whatever reason, did not give the PSA test. And now some of that is a debate at the time about the PSA test itself. Our prior health provider did, in fact, we had a PSA test, and it was perfectly normal. I think it was in 2007, 2008. But as the years move on, things can change, and they do, in fact, change. And one of the other items is diabetes. We do have diabetes. We don't take insulin, but the insulin itself is very expensive. It used to be very cheap. The older insulin is cheap, but the newer insulin is about $500 or $600, depending on where you buy it. And if you had Medicare buying insulin, as the VA does, that price would go down considerably. There's no doubt about that. Let's go to the right-winger Alex Jones. He's being sued for defamation. Apple has removed many of his podcasts that cover such things as the so-called hoax at Sandy Root. Period. The Jones Show, the War Room, is now no more there. Who the Southern Poverty Law Center called the most prolific conspiracy theory in Conspiracy America. Spotify also removed several episodes of the Jones Show, YouTube and Facebook the week before. So in other words, the problem here is, and this has been an old argument that has been going around for many years. The First Amendment, does it cover hate speech? The answer there is no. Justice Holmes talked about that, hauling a fire in a cinema. Now, these things that are out here, Jones has, 825,000 followers on Twitter. But the situation is, all Jones is doing literally is perpetrating a hoax for financial gain. Now, if Jones were a non-profit, it would be a totally different situation, including the financial thing. And you have to understand that these various services have made a lot of money off of Jones. Period. And they're finally getting around to Sandy Hook, which they should have got around to in the first place. Now, the Spotify is a fairly new platform, said it had removed specific episodes for violating our hate content policy. YouTube took down 4 videos from InfoWars, which also the 90-day suspension from live streaming there. Facebook took Jones' personal profile for 30 days and removed 4 videos. This is just a drop in the bucket as these defamation suits proliferate, and they will start to proliferate on old Jones. More and more of these social media sites will start to feel the heat. Period. Now, Jones can obviously do as Rush Limbaugh, have his own private site where he'll charge people to enter and listen to his droll, their racist droll. But that in itself doesn't necessarily get as many people there, and Jones knows this. And as LBJ would say, anyone that's been to a goat roping contest. Let me just look at our time here. Give you your 10-second station break. This is WBRN Radio. Live streaming along here, or almost live streaming along here. Let me go to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar before we do the sports. He has a nice opinion piece here. I think it was in The Guardian where he wrote this. And we'll read it. This is an open letter, I'm going to read the whole thing, to the NFL from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to deny professional athletes the right to express dissent in a peaceful manner is a disgrace to the Constitution and the opposite of patriotism and is shameful, morally weak. Nasser, dear NFL owners, what a tumultuous year for your league. Slipping in attendance and ratings, containing concussion controversy, continuing lawsuits from cheerleaders who refuse to shut up and smile, domestic violence accusations against players, the Papa John mouthing off about something other players are taking the kneel, DJ Trump, problematic ramblings, the Commissioner Goodell under siege from, everybody. Bet it makes you fellows long for the good old days when all of you had to worry about was Janet Jackson. Nipple slip. Where faithful A door when you need someone to hold the door against relentless attacks. You may implement a childish policy about how grown men must respond to the national anthem. A player can't stay in the locker room during the anthem. But if he takes the field, then protests, the team and the player could be fined. And the word is could be fined. Oh, dear owners, you stand at the pinnacle of history, tasking with dealing with whether to choose the principle of the U.S. Constitution over profit of commerce, patriotism over pandering, and morality over mob mentality, promoting social justice over pushing beers, and sadly, you blinked, and courage, it seems, is expected only of players. Now follow the Miami Dolphins channeling of abusive students in the Stanford prison experiment by over-punishing protesting players. The May agreement is frozen and a new negotiation has begun, this time including the NFL Players Association. A knee-jerk reaction came on the 26th of July when the Cowboys owner, Jones, announced that he required all players to stand during the anthem, or else. The president, DJ Trump, was not too busy with his tariff war to claim a personal victory. Way to go, Jerry. This is what the league should do. Too busy to put in the comma after go. Anyway. It has been 2 years since the hero Colin Kaepernick first took a knee to protest systematic racial injustice, especially police brutality against people of color. The worst thing about that isn't that 2 years later we are still debating whether players have a right to protest. It is not much a change regarding what Kaepernick was protesting. A study by Harvard and Stanford economists on the Equality of Opportunity Project concluded that black boys raised by wealthy two parents in upscale neighborhoods still do not have the same earning potential as low-income European boys. As for police brutality and shootings, where President Trump oversaw vast reforms of local police departments here, Trump has advised police departments to rough up thugs and don't be too nice, although racial minorities are only 37.4% of the population. They account for 62.7% of unarmed people killed by police. Every day we have someone killed by police. Just bad luck. Some of these studies show that in video game simulations, police officers are quicker to shoot African American suspects than European suspects, revealing a subconscious racial bias. Even after the bad cop is fired, most are simply hired by other police departments. That's true. The bad eggs they go out and get. Why aren't the NFL owners outraged by that? If it were European people suffering these statistics, you wouldn't even play the national anthem. Then again, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to become owners in the first place. And let me finish this up here. We're all entitled to our opinions, but when those opinions translate into actions that affect the whole community at large, we have a responsibility to scrutinize those options and to hold them to a higher standard of reason. Denying your players these freedoms to express their concerns sends a clear message that you don't value your African players' values. You are telling them that you must abide by your European perspective of social justice, even though you have no experience with the kind of institutional injustice that robs the community of lives, hopes, and a future. You're the owners that you own the franchise, but you don't own the players or their hearts and minds. I'm reminded of the song from the protest of Bill Oach. I'm going to say it now, and I don't know his name. Yours truly, a Kareem, and this is to be fair. Not all you owners have cowered under the false flag of patriotism to hide their share. The New York Jets chair, Christopher Johnson, said the team would not discipline a player, who protests, and he would pay the league's fine. The co-owner of the Giants, Steve Tash, also said that his players would not be punished. Jerry Laurie, the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, released a statement vehemently supporting his players' right to influence positive change. The CEO of the 49ers and sole absentee from the May vote has not elaborated on the club's policy. I'm sure your players appreciate your loyalty to them. The rest of us respect your integrity in the face of political pressure. And there is $90 million the NFL has earmarked for social justice causes over 7 years, and that would not have been earmarked not for Colin Kaepernick. So we have more if you go to this is one right here. I want the complicated relationship between sports and politics. This is from journalist resources. We put it on Facebook. A new study suggests serious sports fans are likely to show strong support for the U.S. military, a finding that could help explain why some Americans react negatively to athletes kneeling during the national anthem. The study does not address sports fans, but here are some other findings. American football is the most popular sport in the U.S., with 56% of adults identifying as fans. 38% are baseball fans. Our sport, 26% are basketball fans, while 34% of women and 18% of men say they don't follow any sport. That's a high percentage right there. Baseball fans of all races are more likely to identify as basketball fans, as Democrats and liberals than individuals who do not follow basketball. The research did not find similar links between political parties and other types of sports. Political conservatives are much more likely to say they oppose mixing sports and politics, and we'll append this study here later. This is from the Shorstein Center at the Harvard Kennedy School. Anyway, we'll dispose of that, and we'll go to the sports baseball scores from last night here, and let me just get it, and we'll conclude our broadcast. But Kareem does, in fact, have some words of wisdom. This is a game that we tuned into 5-4. It was the Red Sox versus the Yankees in Fenway Park. It was a 5-1 game, and it went into extra innings, as many games do, and the both Sox didn't quite make it back. But they did make it back. That meant they had a sweep of 4 games over the infamous Yankees. I can say that. And it was one of those games. It was over 4 hours long, very, very long game. The Major League Baseball's tried to shorten games, but yet we have this coming up. The Angels were in Cleveland 4-3. Atlanta was in New York. Atlanta 5-1 in that contest, and that was 10 endings. There were a lot of extra endings. games. The White Sox were in Florida 8-1. 8-7. The White Sox over Rays. Excuse me. The Reds were in Washington 2-1 was the score. Nationals are starting to win a little. The Marlins were in Philadelphia. The Phillies are starting also to win here. 5-3 was the score there. The Cardinals and Pirates in Pittsburgh. Cardinals a 2-1 game there. Mr. Flaherty was the winner. And Norm got the save. And in 11, the Rockies Brewers in Milwaukee. Rockies have also been winning. 5-4 was the score there. The Royals were in Minnesota, Twins 6-5. The Padres were in Wrigley Field and did a rout on the Cubs, 10-6. The Padres had 15 hits, 2 errors, and the Cubs 12 hits and no errors. The Orioles and Rangers in Texas. Orioles 9. They shut the Rangers out. The Giants and D-backs in the desert. The Giants finally pulled one off. 3-2 was the score there. Mr. Black was the winner. The Tigers and Athletics in Oakland. The Athletics shut out the Tigers 6-0. Cahill was the winner. There. Toronto and the Mariners in Seattle. Mariners 6-3. The Astros and Dodgers, very interesting game there. The Dodgers pulled the game off 3-2. Very good game there. Mr. Walker Buehler, a young pitcher, was the winner. Kenley Jansen, of course, got the save. But you look at the line score here, the Astros had 5 hits, no errors, and the Dodgers 7 hits, no errors. And in 10, that was a game we were talking about in Boston. Red Sox 5-4. The Yankees had 10 hits, 2 errors, and the Sox 10 hits and 1 error in Fenway Park. And so it goes. Mr. Barnes finally got the win there, and so it goes, as one would say. Anyway, this will do it for the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 6th of August, 2018. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon, that we can promise. And we do have a little wrap-up from Face the Nation. They're talking about some of the same things, a little bit about the machinations involving DJ Trump. The latest machination being his son, Junior. We'll call him there. Junior's not very smart, but they were trying to utilize a Russian operative for background research, opposition research as they call it now, on Hillary the Monster Clinton, if they did not have enough in the public domain. But that in itself, and if Trump knew about it, that could be collusion. DJ Trump could be having some problems, and Junior could, as they say, as OJ would say, going to the big house. So this is an interesting situation as it rocks on. We continue to monitor the polling to where DJ Trump is in the 40s, the low 40s. We had a business, independent business poll, very good poll. Had DJ Trump at 41. Take a quick look here. And let's see. Go to Real Clear Politics. They are averaging. We won't go into the averaging part of it. We'll just look at some of the polls as they are. And I don't know if we have anything out on Monday morning, the latest polls. In many of these, we do in the Kansas governor's race, Trafalgar poll there. Kobach is up by 7 over Culver, excuse me. Anyway, that is there are 3 of them in the race there. That's Republican primary in the state of Kansas. So we had out of Oklahoma, don't have very much, this is a remnant research. Set is up by 10 over Cornett. Cornett is the more progressive of the Republicans. And this is the independent business daily poll here, fairly accurate poll. 41% for DJ Trump. We'll leave it at that.
I think one test case of that could be in the Georgia governor's race, where we've seen Stacey Abrams as one of the 80 candidates that the former president put his muscle behind when he made his endorsement announcements over the week. But President Trump has also put his political power behind the Republican candidate there. Remember, in that primary, it looked as if the perceived more mainstream candidate, Casey Cagle, would have won the primary, but President Trump weighed in with a tweet, and boom, went Brian Kemp in winning that nomination. So that could be an interesting state, considering all the dynamics in Georgia where the 2 presidents could go head-to-head. But the president's political power and how much he matters is really going to be on display in that special election this Tuesday. I mean, we saw him go last minute, try to get that last-minute surge for Republican Troy Balderson, ahead of the election on Tuesday, but people are already drawing parallels to that special election that we had in Pennsylvania back in March, where it's a very Republican district. The president had won that district by 20 points, but it was the Democrat who surged to victory in that race. There's already a lot of nervousness among the Republican Party about whether they're going to lose this seat. This is a seat that went for President Trump by 11 points. This is a seat that the Republicans should win, but outside groups are pouring so much money into this race. And it'll be a major backlash for Republicans if Democrats emerge victorious there on Tuesday.
Leslie, do you expect the seat to be flipped?
I don't. I don't. A lot of people would like to think that that's the case, but I think there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of undercurrent underneath this wave. We say this the big blue wave with a lot of pink boats, the female candidates, the non-traditional candidates that are coming in, and we like. But in this case, when the president does, in most cases, marshal his resources, get the party behind him, put all those dollars in, that was really the message of the summer meeting in Austin last week, that you get on board or you get out. This president is going to win. You need to get his message and really champion that. But I think there's some
He made that clear in Ohio last night.
He really did. And he still, and the word is coming down, which is why I say the Republican Party went from a roar to a whisper. They're like, well, he's winning. So at what cost do they win? But there's interesting issues like that. And I'd also point to a non-traditional place like Texas Congressional District 31, which you have MJ Hager, which is the female candidate, the veteran helicopter pilot who's raising 4 times as much as her incumbent opponent, Republican area. She used to be a Republican, running as a Democrat, getting a lot of interest, and Republican women are taking her seriously and now looking at holding fundraisers for her. So there's a lot of fissures within what these swing districts or even Republican safe districts would look like.
And when you listen to the president, when he speaks at these rallies, it sounds like a greatest hit. Some of the things that during his own campaign really seemed to resonate with his base in terms of immigration and the press, Mark.
Yes.
Enemy of the people. Kellyanne Conway said she doesn't believe that the media is an enemy of the people. This is obviously useful for the president. He cites it frequently. Why does he argue this?
Well, as you say, it plays wonderfully with his base, and it's been a hit for him throughout the campaign, and it continues to be one of the most popular things. When you go to a Trump rally, it almost has such a feeling of ritual now, and there's certain things that people who go to rallies expect, and one of the things they expect is the opportunity to start chanting CNN sucks and to turn around and vilify the people standing in the media pen. So that's why he does it. I think that the problem that we're running into is that his repeated and methodical use of the phrase enemy of the people, and he did it as recently as this morning when he also suggested that people in the media cause wars to happen, is that phrase is particularly loaded. The phrase fake news, which he also uses, is corrosive to the credibility of the media over time. It's unfair. He shouldn't use it. But the phrase enemy of the people is, I think, a whole different order of magnitude. This is a phrase that has a long historic provenance. It goes back to the French Revolution. It goes back to Stalin, to Mao, to Lenin. People in those totalitarian societies use the phrase enemy of the people to suggest that one group in society was subhuman. And by doing so, it opened the door to all kinds of violence being carried out against them. I'm not saying that President Trump understands the historical provenance of this phrase, but people who are seeing it out in the world certainly do. So by using it over and over again the way he does, I think he opens the door to the possibility of bad things happening. Now, we've been really lucky. We've been through many, many, many rallies during the campaign and since he's been president, and there really hasn't been a spillover to outright violence. It's been more in the realm of menacing reporters, and it's scary, but, you know, I don't think any of us have really had anyone take a swing at us. But the fear I have is that by continuing to do this, by normalizing this language, by making it part of the vocabulary of the country, he does open the door to have some violence happen down the road. And I think that's just extraordinarily dangerous.
And that's why I ask it, because I know many of us find it uncomfortable talking about journalists, being them ourselves. Paula, family separation. Tell me where we are with the administration trying to reunify families.
They're not completely done with this yet. There's still a long way to go. And I think this is one of the clearest examples of the president sort of coming out with a policy, not all the key players being on the same page. Almost exactly what we saw with the travel ban, too. And we saw, well, yes, it's a deterrent. No, it's not a deterrent. No, this is a new policy. No, this isn't a new policy. And they've created quite a legal quagmire for themselves. So there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of reunifying the families. And then the big question of, well, what exactly is the administration's policy at this moment? And if you cross the border into the U.S. illegally, will you be detained together as a family? Will you be separated? What exactly happens to you?
And about roughly 400 or so families.
If that may be the last number, yes.
All right, thank you very much. We will be right back in a moment. Is a CBS News political contributor. Sungmin Kim covers the White House from Capitol Hill for the Washington Post, and Paula Reed is a CBS News correspondent. Great to have you all here. Always a lot to chew on, but Paula, we should have our own legal panel here because I feel like there's so much to digest from this week. Let's start with the president's tweets this morning. He is out there defending his son and saying that he has no concerns about him legally and this meeting that he took at Trump Tower with a lawyer linked to the Kremlin. Should he be concerned?
Yes, he should be concerned, even more so than he should be concerned for himself, because Donald Trump Jr. does have some legal exposure here. And the fact that he has not yet been interviewed by special counsel investigators, that should concern everyone, because typically in an investigation like this, you want to come in early. You want to be someone they're gathering evidence from, not the person who walks into the room and they have a pile of evidence and they start going through it. Now, his potential legal exposure, the first is for anyone who walks into this situation, lying. But in a case like this, where there are all these different iterations of what happened in that Trump Tower meeting, that's a tremendous exposure for him. The possibility of perjury. He says he did not know, his father did not know about the Trump Tower meeting. Michael Cohen said he did. I think, legally speaking, it would be easy to discredit Cohen as a witness. And if Mueller thought there was something there, he likely would have handed that case off. But then the big question of the entire case is, was there any coordination or support or assistance with the Russians in terms of disseminating that dirt that they had?
Now, at the time, the first version of events given by the White House was that this was a meeting about adoptions, linking to an issue of concern for the Russian government. The president today says, no, it was about opposition research solely, and there's nothing illegal about that.
Exactly. The good news for them is there's no crime in lying to the press. But what they need to do is they need to figure out what exactly their story is, and it needs to be supported by the evidence. They need to make sure there's no witnesses or other evidence that would contradict that and expose them to lying when they sit down with investigators. But the special counsel does have questions for the president about why that statement was drafted, sort of misleading people about the reason for this meeting.
Mark, when we had Kellyanne Conway on the show, she was trying to explain that the president, when he uses this term Russian hoax, is referring to misunderstandings or misconstruing of facts related to the investigation, and that it has nothing to do with what his national security team says. you've been writing about the fact that they're saying two different things about the same topic, actually, which is the view on Russia, period.
Yeah, this is a recurring theme with the Trump White House, which is the efforts of his aides to sort of narrow the scope of what he's saying. When he talks about a Russian hoax, particularly in a tweet or in some of the inflammatory ways he does, he's really denigrating the entire effort to get at Russian interference in American elections and, frankly, to guard against interference in the midterm elections. And so I think that this week we saw this just amazing split screen where the administration arrayed all its top intelligence and law enforcement officials behind the podium at the White House, made this persuasive presentation about how seriously they take the threat and what they're going to do to try to fend it off. And then a day later, hours later, at a political rally, President Trump, in effect, dismisses the whole thing as much ado about nothing. For Kellyanne Conway to say, well, he's only narrowly talking about an investigation, no one in the American public is taking it that way. They're viewing it as what I think the president intends, which is to diminish the importance of the issue. And I think the reason he does that goes back to his own long-standing doubts about the legitimacy of his own election and his concern that if he gives this any credibility, it will reduce his own credibility. And so I think that this split screen is really what matters and not the after-the-fact attempts by the White House to spin it.
Is the effort here, to manage the public understanding of the Russia investigation, or is it to manage the president's own party? Because what you hear consistently from the Republican establishment is that they stand with the intelligence community and their version of events, not the characterization as a hoax.
I think it's a little bit of, it's multiple things. I think in terms of the public perception of Russia, and also we talk about how, along with the Mueller investigation, we talk often about how the president's constant tweeting and his attacks on Mueller is partially to just publicly discredit the investigation. So you do see that kind of...
With an eye towards what could happen.
Exactly.
With a potential impeachment.
Exactly. And you saw the shock coming from Capitol Hill right after his comments in Helsinki alongside Vladimir Putin. But I think that whenever we ask congressional Republicans, look at the president's rhetoric, a lot of times they do point towards, well, look at what Dan Coates is saying, or what Secretary Nielsen is saying, or Director Wray. They're satisfied with what his administration officials are saying, but, that is a different message coming from his top officials versus the president.
Leslie, I know you've been out there doing some reporting. Does all of this translate to people at home and people who are going to go place votes in November?
Big disconnect, right. So what the Republican Party is thinking is they want to buck traditional norms. They want the president not to have the major losses that most president would have at a midterm election when these midterms tend to be a referendum on the president. They're saying, wait a minute, we have raised $250 million this election cycle. We have $50 million in the bank, meaning the Republican Party, and they're ready to marshal those resources on the ground, and they understand what the president understands, which is very much to this point, the pulse of the people. What used to be a roar in the Republican Party is now a whisper because the economy is strong, the president is now at 50% approval, more or less, Congress is still at 10% approval, and they see that unemployment's low, and they can win. They may like the agenda, they may not like the man.
Paula, just to button up one part of the legal question this week, and that was
so many.
The former Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was in court last week. He will be headed back there. There was all this color about his personal wealth, his clothing. What is the prosecution trying to lay out here in terms of the picture?
Well, as the judge likes to continue to remind everyone, he is not on trial for having a lot of money and throwing it around. This trial has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the campaign. The allegation is that he made tens of millions of dollars from lobbying on behalf of Ukrainian politicians, but instead of having the check sent to one of his 6 houses, he had it put into offshore bank accounts. And then in order to allegedly get this money into the U.S., he laundered it through these luxury purchases. And that's where we get some of the color. The homes, the cars, the ostrich coat. Yes. And so that's their theory of the case. But it is important to remember we did hear from some of his accountants late in the week, and there was evidence that some of this conduct, especially doctoring forms when he wanted to try to get some loans, some of that conduct did extend to his time in the Trump campaign.
Is there any connection to the president and what has happened so far?
So far, no connection to the president. Kellyanne Conway, she cited the judge. But let's be really clear what the judge has said about the special counsel investigation. During the preliminary hearings, the judge had questions about whether or not tax evasion or bank fraud, whether or not that was in the special counsel's authority. The judge came out and said, you're not interested in bank fraud. You're just trying to get this guy to cooperate in your investigation. Everyone sort of nodded and acknowledged this was a fact, and he allowed the case to proceed. But the president and his allies, they've seized on those comments to try to say the special counsel investigation is illegitimate or a federal judge said they were out of bounds. But the judge has sort of nodded to exactly what's going on here.
Mark, do we have any idea, turning to the foreign policy front, what was in the letter from President Trump to Kim Jong-un that was handed off this weekend to North Korean officials?
We don't know the specifics of what's in that letter, but I think we have a fairly good idea, based on the president's own characterization of his recent interaction, that it was probably a very friendly letter thanking Kim for the letter he had sent, and probably setting the predicate for another meeting. There's a lot of talk about maybe doing it pardon me, at the United Nations in September. But again, to go to this, it's a recurring theme with this administration, this notion of a dissonance or a split screen. You have this very cozy, friendly relationship being built between Kim and Trump, and then underneath you have this very combative, even sometimes bitter negotiation between Mike Pompeo and his counterpart on the issue of denuclearization. And you saw that in stark terms, even as an American diplomat was handing the letter to the North Koreans in Singapore to deliver to Kim. Another North Korean official was lambasting the United States and Mike Pompeo for their bad attitude in the negotiations. And so what you see, and I think it's deliberate on the part of the North Koreans, is an effort in a way to drive a wedge between the president and his own negotiators. Kim thinks that President Trump is sincere and well-meaning and well-intentioned and wants to have a good relationship, but those pesky diplomats keep demanding that North Korea do all these things to denuclearize. It's a pretty effective strategy. It puts Mike Pompeo in a very bad spot because he's the guy who has to deliver this deal. And he's been very forthright about saying he sees a long, difficult negotiation ahead of the United States and North Korea.
And he acknowledged, he said, the timeline is going to be up to Chairman Kim. Thus far, no denuclearization that we have seen at the moment. We're going to take a quick break here, and we have so much more to talk about, so stay with us. We are back now with our panel. Seungmin Kim, I want to ask you, the president has already been out there on the campaign trail 3 times this week. He was in Ohio last night ahead of the special election. We also learned that former President Obama is going to be hitting the campaign trail pretty soon and laid out his endorsements. Are they going to be going head to head?
It'd be interesting to see